The sound of the office door slamming shut echoed through the eerily quiet hallway, leaving behind a deafening silence that seemed to mock her very existence. Margaret stood frozen in place, her wrinkled hands clutching the worn leather portfolio she'd carried faithfully for over 3 decades. The words still burned in her ears: outdated, irrelevant, time to make way for younger talent. Her boss's voice had been cold and calculated, each syllable precisely aimed to wound. At 72, Margaret had witnessed countless changes in the media industry. She'd started as a cub reporter when typewriters still clattered in newsrooms, evolved through the digital revolution, and adapted to social media trends that baffled most people half her age. Yet here she was, dismissed like yesterday's newspaper, her years of experience reduced to a mere inconvenience in the eyes of corporate progress. The fluorescent lights above flickered menacingly, casting long shadows across the empty cubicles. Each workstation told a story. Hers was the one with neatly stacked papers, carefully organized files, and a small collection of press awards that now seemed meaningless. The young interns' desks overflowed with energy drinks and trendy tech gadgets, a stark contrast to her traditional setup. Margaret's fingers brushed against the edge of her desk, feeling the familiar grooves where decades of hard work had left their mark. As she gathered her belongings, memories flooded back uninvited. The breaking news stories she'd chased through rain-slick streets, the late-night deadlines met with determination rather than caffeine, the mentors who had guided her before becoming just names on dedication pages. All these experiences, once valued assets, now deemed worthless by a generation obsessed with youth and instant results. Her heart pounded painfully against her chest as reality settled in. This wasn't just about losing a job, it was about being erased, having her entire professional identity dismissed as obsolete. The framed photographs of her career milestones felt heavy in her trembling hands: the Pulitzer nomination, the investigative piece that changed city policy, the feature that humanized an entire community. These weren't just achievements, they were pieces of her soul, now packed away into a cardboard box like forgotten relics. The elevator ride down felt interminably long, each floor bringing her closer to an uncertain future. As the doors opened to the bustling city street, Margaret hesitated. Outside, the world moved at its usual frenetic pace, oblivious to the personal earthquake that had just shattered her professional life. Young professionals rushed past her, their faces illuminated by smartphone screens, their conversations filled with buzzwords she recognized but never fully embraced. Standing there, caught between worlds, Margaret realized something more profound than fear or anger. This dismissal wasn't just about her age. It was about everything she represented: the value of experience, the importance of patience in storytelling, the wisdom that came from weathering countless storms in the industry. And somewhere deep inside, amidst the hurt and humiliation, a spark of defiance began to glow. 3 days later, sitting in her modest apartment surrounded by boxes of mementos, Margaret couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't the end of her story. She stared at the wall where her diploma hung beside her first press pass, both slightly faded but still proud testaments to a lifetime of dedication. The morning light filtered through the curtains, illuminating dust motes that danced like tiny fireworks in the air. Her fingers absently traced the edges of an old notebook, one she hadn't opened in years, while her mind replayed every conversation, every source cultivated, every truth uncovered during her career. The realization hit her like a thunderclap: all those years of building relationships, of maintaining meticulous records, of understanding the intricate web connecting politicians, business leaders and community figures, had created something invaluable. Something no young upstart with their viral content strategies could replicate overnight. Margaret rose from her chair, suddenly energized, and began pulling out ancient filing cabinets she'd stored away after retiring from full-time field reporting. Inside lay decades of carefully documented information, handwritten notes from sources who had since risen to power, detailed chronicles of political dealings, and intimate knowledge of how the city's power structure really operated beneath the surface. She remembered Jonathan Carter, the ambitious intern she'd mentored 20 years ago, now a prominent city council member. There was Maria Lopez, whose restaurant empire had started with a single food truck Margaret had profiled. Even that tech startup founder, Alex Chen, whom she'd interviewed when he was still coding in his parents' basement, they all owed their initial coverage to her. Each name sparked memories of stories told and untold, connections forged through genuine interest rather than networking events. Margaret's fingers trembled as she opened her ancient laptop, the screen flickering to life after years of disuse. The password, a combination of her first major scoop date and her mother's birthday, worked on the third try. Files upon files of research material, contact lists, and unpublished leads emerged from digital archives. Her heart raced faster as she scrolled through documents detailing corruption patterns in city contracts, tracking how certain developers always seemed to win bids despite questionable practices. These weren't just old stories, they were threads waiting to be woven into a tapestry of truth. What made her collection truly unique was the context only she possessed. Modern journalists might have access to data analytics and social media monitoring tools, but they lacked the nuanced understanding of how these pieces fit together over time. Margaret knew which politicians had quietly changed positions, which business leaders had hidden conflicts of interest, and which community voices had been systematically ignored. This wasn't just information, it was institutional memory, preserved through careful documentation and personal relationships. As afternoon turned to evening, Margaret found herself immersed in a particular file about urban development projects. She recalled interviews conducted under the pretense of routine reporting, casual conversations at charity events, and off-the-record meetings in dimly lit restaurants. Each interaction had been catalogued, every detail noted, creating a comprehensive picture that would take others years to assemble. The significance of what she held became clearer with each passing moment. This wasn't just her career's work. It was a weapon, a tool that could reshape narratives and expose truths hidden beneath layers of bureaucracy and spin. Her phone buzzed insistently on the table, but she barely noticed. The young reporters who had replaced her at the paper might have speed and technology on their side, but they lacked something far more crucial, the deep-rooted understanding of how power truly operated in their city. Margaret smiled grimly as she realized that her so-called obsolescence had actually made her more dangerous than ever. After all, what better way to fight back than with the very thing her former employer had dismissed as outdated? The next morning found Margaret seated at her kitchen table, sunlight streaming through the window as she meticulously crafted her response. Her fingers flew across the keyboard with surprising agility for someone her age, each keystroke accompanied by the soft click of coffee cups against saucers. The local independent journalist network she'd helped establish years ago was already buzzing with anticipation. She dropped cryptic hints about a major story developing, enough to pique interest without revealing her hand. First, she reached out to Jonathan Carter, now a prominent city council member. Their relationship had grown beyond mentorship to genuine friendship, and she knew exactly how to phrase her request. "Jonathan," she typed, "I need your help verifying some patterns I've noticed in recent zoning approvals. Remember that proposal you mentioned last month?" The message was carefully worded, no accusations, just innocent curiosity from an old friend. Within minutes, his response confirmed her suspicions. Several key votes had aligned suspiciously with campaign contributions from specific developers. Next, she contacted Maria Lopez, whose restaurant chain had become a local institution. Through casual conversation about upcoming developments affecting small businesses, Margaret learned about private meetings between developers and city officials at Maria's flagship location. The restaurateur, unaware of the larger implications, shared details that perfectly complemented the documentation Margaret already possessed. Each new piece of information slid into place like pieces of a complex puzzle. Alex Chun proved particularly valuable. When she mentioned needing technical analysis of financial transactions, he immediately offered his company's resources. "Margaret," he messaged, "if anyone can spot patterns in data, it's my team. Send me what you have." The irony wasn't lost on her. The very technology-driven approach her former employer valued was now working in her favor, enhanced by the depth of understanding only years of experience could provide. Throughout the day, her network expanded exponentially. Veteran reporters she trained responded enthusiastically to her call for collaboration, eager to contribute their own observations. A retired city planner shared confidential memos from the 1990s that directly contradicted current official statements. An investigative photographer offered visual evidence of construction site irregularities dating back years. Each connection built upon the last, creating a mosaic of information that painted a damning picture of systemic corruption. By evening, Margaret's apartment had transformed into a command center. Sticky notes covered every available surface, color-coded to represent different aspects of the investigation. Her phone constantly vibrated with incoming messages, each one adding another layer to the story unfolding before her eyes. What had started as personal vindication had evolved into something far greater, a comprehensive examination of power dynamics that affected everyone in the city. The complexity of her operation became evident as she coordinated multiple threads simultaneously. While one group focused on analyzing financial records, another tracked public statements against documented actions. Younger journalists, drawn by her reputation and the promise of a groundbreaking story, volunteered to handle the technological aspects she found challenging. They marveled at her ability to connect seemingly unrelated events, to draw lines between incidents separated by years and contexts. As midnight approached, Margaret paused to review the day's progress. Her eyes scanned the organized chaos surrounding her, the physical manifestation of decades spent observing, documenting, and understanding her city's inner workings. The young reporters at her former publication might have speed and flashy presentation skills, but they lacked the patience to see how individual trees formed a forest. And now, thanks to her carefully cultivated network and unwavering dedication, she was about to show them exactly what they had dismissed as irrelevant. The following days blurred into a whirlwind of activity as Margaret orchestrated what would become the most significant journalistic endeavor of her career. Her makeshift command center transformed into a hive of purposeful movement, with volunteers rotating through her apartment around the clock. The younger journalists she'd recruited brought energy and technical expertise, while her seasoned contacts provided depth and historical context. Together, they created a synergy that neither group could achieve alone. Each morning began with strategy sessions where Margaret mapped out the day's priorities on her living room wall, using colored markers to connect different aspects of the investigation. The pattern emerging was staggering, a web of influence stretching across multiple city departments, involving dozens of individuals and millions of dollars. As pieces fell into place, the scope of the corruption became increasingly apparent, making even the most cynical veterans gasp in disbelief. The technology gap that had once seemed insurmountable now worked in their favor. While her former colleagues struggled with limited access to official records, Margaret's network used legitimate channels to gather information. Freedom of Information Act requests, public record searches, and simple shoe leather reporting combined with sophisticated data analysis techniques. Young programmers wrote algorithms to detect patterns in municipal spending, cross-referencing them with property transfers and campaign finance reports. Midway through the week, a breakthrough occurred that changed everything. A whistleblower from the city planning department, someone Margaret had interviewed years ago for a minor zoning dispute, reached out with internal documents confirming many of their suspicions. The files revealed a systematic process of approving projects that benefited specific developers, complete with code words and signaling mechanisms embedded in official communications. Margaret's heart raced as she recognized references to cases she'd covered decades earlier, the same patterns repeating with different players but identical outcomes. The coordination required to manage such a massive operation tested every skill Margaret had developed over her career. She maintained communication channels through encrypted messaging apps, scheduled regular check-ins with different teams, and ensured proper documentation of every discovery. Her apartment became a fortress of information security, with strict protocols for handling sensitive materials. The respect she commanded became evident when even the most tech-savvy members deferred to her judgment on matters of operational security. As evidence mounted, Margaret faced difficult decisions about timing and release strategy. Traditional outlets showed interest, but she knew better than to trust established media organizations completely. Instead, she implemented a multi-pronged approach, releasing smaller stories through independent platforms to build momentum, while preparing a comprehensive report for simultaneous publication across multiple channels. Her experience taught her that spreading information through various networks increased its resilience against attempts at suppression. The emotional toll of the investigation weighed heavily on everyone involved. Late nights stretched into early mornings, fueled by endless pots of coffee and shared meals delivered by supportive friends. Arguments erupted over methodology and prioritization, only to dissolve into laughter as veteran reporters shared war stories with wide-eyed newcomers. Through it all, Margaret remained the calm center, her steady presence guiding the operation forward even when frustration threatened to derail progress. One particularly tense evening, as conflicting pieces of evidence threatened to undermine weeks of work, Margaret gathered everyone in her living room. In 40 years, she said, her voice carrying the weight of experience, I've learned that truth doesn't reveal itself all at once. Sometimes it hides in plain sight, waiting for us to connect the dots. Trust the process, trust each other, and most importantly, trust that we're doing something important. Her words resonated deeply, reigniting the team's determination. What had started as a personal mission had evolved into something transcendent, a testament to the power of experience married to innovation, of institutional memory combined with fresh perspectives. The young reporters watched in awe as Margaret navigated complex political landscapes with ease born of years of observation, while she marveled at their ability to process vast amounts of data quickly and efficiently. As the investigation entered its final stages, Margaret found herself reflecting on the irony of the situation. Her former employer had dismissed her as outdated, yet it was precisely her accumulated knowledge and carefully maintained relationships that had made this operation possible. The very qualities they deemed obsolete had become their greatest vulnerability. Every source cultivated, every note taken, every pattern observed over decades had prepared her for this moment, not just to prove a point, but to serve the public good in ways her critics could never have imagined. The atmosphere in Margaret's apartment grew electric as the team prepared for the story's release. Volunteers worked feverishly, double-checking facts and formatting documents while maintaining absolute secrecy. The coordinated release plan spanned multiple platforms, from established independent media outlets to grassroots social media campaigns designed to maximize impact. Margaret oversaw every detail, her experience catching potential vulnerabilities others might miss. The tension in the room was palpable, a mixture of excitement and apprehension that crackled in the air like static electricity. Across town, her former employer's headquarters hummed with its usual mid-morning activity. Editors reviewed pitches, reporters tapped away at their keyboards, and interns scurried between departments. None suspected the storm gathering just beyond their walls. In the executive suite, Margaret's former boss finalized plans for the next quarter's initiatives, proudly touting their commitment to modern journalism to board members on a conference call. His confidence stemmed from the belief that his decision to terminate Margaret had eliminated any threat from the old guard of journalism. Meanwhile, Margaret's extensive network activated according to plan. Key influencers received advance copies of the report with strict embargo instructions. City officials found themselves fielding discreet inquiries from trusted contacts, each question probing deeper into the corruption exposed in the investigation. Sources who had spoken off the record years ago now found their recollections verified by newly discovered documents. The machinery of accountability began turning, powered by decades of carefully maintained relationships and institutional knowledge. As noon approached, Margaret watched the clock with a mixture of satisfaction and trepidation. Her phone vibrated constantly with status updates from various teams, each confirming their readiness. The young reporters who had joined her cause moved with precision born of weeks of preparation, their initial skepticism replaced by unwavering dedication. The air seemed charged with anticipation, as if the city itself held its breath, waiting for the revelation that would rock its foundations. Back at the newspaper office, a junior reporter noticed unusual activity on social media channels. At first glance, it appeared random: concerned citizens sharing documents, community leaders posting cryptic messages, influential voices questioning official narratives. But as more posts appeared, a pattern emerged that sent chills down his spine. He approached his editor with screenshots, only to be dismissed with a wave of the hand. Probably just another conspiracy theory, the editor muttered, unaware of how profoundly wrong they were. Margaret's former boss stepped out of his meeting, scrolling through emails on his phone. His expression shifted from mild annoyance to growing concern as he noticed the increasing volume of queries from other media outlets. Reporters who had once scoffed at his progressive hiring policies now demanded comments about allegations circulating through trusted channels. His confident stride faltered as he realized the scope of what was unfolding, not just a single exposé, but a comprehensive dismantling of the narrative he had worked so hard to establish. The first articles broke just after lunch, timed perfectly to catch readers during their afternoon lull. Headlines screamed across devices, each more damning than the last. Evidence poured forth in a carefully orchestrated cascade: financial records, internal communications, photographic documentation, and expert analysis, all presented with irrefutable clarity. Margaret's team had anticipated every counterargument, preemptively addressing potential defenses with additional layers of verification. The sheer volume of information overwhelmed traditional fact-checking methods, forcing even skeptical editors to acknowledge its validity. Inside the newspaper office, chaos erupted. Editors scrambled to verify claims, only to find their own archives cited as sources. Reporters discovered that key contacts had already spoken to Margaret's network, providing context and corroboration that made denial impossible. The very system Margaret's former boss had championed, rapid turnaround times and superficial coverage, now worked against them, as other outlets raced to cover the developing story with depth and detail they couldn't match. As the afternoon wore on, Margaret monitored the fallout with a mixture of satisfaction and sorrow. Messages poured in from colleagues thanking her for exposing what many had suspected but couldn't prove. Some expressed regret for not standing by her side during her termination, while others simply marveled at the scale of her achievement. Her phone buzzed incessantly with interview requests, but she remained focused on managing the ongoing release of information. The newspaper's executive suite descended into panic. Legal advisors rushed in with urgent warnings, while public relations specialists struggled to craft responses to questions they hadn't seen coming. Margaret's former boss paced his office, finally grasping the magnitude of his mistake. The woman he had dismissed as outdated had become the architect of his undoing, wielding the very qualities he had derided as weapons against him. His vision of modern journalism, built on speed and surface-level engagement, crumbled beneath the weight of thorough investigation and patient accumulation of evidence. Through it all, Margaret maintained her composure, directing her team with the calm authority of someone who had seen journalism cycles come and go. She knew this was more than personal vindication. It was a demonstration of enduring values in an industry increasingly obsessed with metrics and immediacy. The investigation wasn't just exposing corruption, it was proving that true journalism required time, dedication, and the wisdom that only experience could provide. By late afternoon, the story had gained unstoppable momentum. Major networks interrupted programming with breaking news alerts, while social media platforms lit up with discussions and analyses. Margaret's carefully planned release strategy had created a perfect storm of information, overwhelming attempts at damage control or suppression. What had begun as a personal mission had transformed into a watershed moment for journalism itself, challenging fundamental assumptions about what constituted effective reporting in the digital age. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across her apartment, Margaret reflected on the day's events. The transformation from dismissed senior employee to orchestrator of one of the city's most significant journalistic endeavors wasn't lost on her. Each notification on her phone, each breaking news alert, served as validation not just of her abilities, but of the enduring value of experience and institutional memory. The very qualities her former employer had deemed obsolete had become the foundation of an operation that would redefine standards in investigative journalism. Her former boss's attempts to contain the situation grew increasingly desperate. Initial dismissals of the reports as unverified allegations gave way to frantic damage control as evidence mounted. The newspaper's editorial board convened emergency meetings, struggling to reconcile their commitment to transparency with the reality that their own leadership had enabled the very corruption now exposed. Margaret watched from afar as the organization she had served for decades unraveled under the weight of its own hubris, its carefully constructed facade crumbling before the relentless force of truth. The irony wasn't lost on her. The very technologies and methodologies her former colleagues had embraced to stay current had accelerated the spread of her investigation. Social media algorithms designed to promote sensational content amplified the story's reach, while data visualization tools helped illustrate complex patterns of corruption in ways that resonated with both traditional readers and younger audiences. What had started as a personal mission had evolved into a masterclass in modern journalism, combining timeless principles with contemporary tools to maximum effect. As night fell, Margaret's phone continued to buzz with messages from colleagues and competitors alike. Established reporters praised her for demonstrating that real journalism transcended generational divides, while younger journalists expressed admiration for her ability to leverage both old-school methods and new technologies. Her apartment, once a solitary workspace, had become a nerve center for a movement that challenged conventional thinking about what constituted effective reporting. The careful documentation she had maintained throughout her career, previously viewed as unnecessary clutter, now stood as a testament to the power of persistence and thoroughness. The investigation's impact rippled through the city's power structure, sending shockwaves through boardrooms and government offices. Figures who had operated with impunity found themselves answering questions they thought buried in the past. Deals made in smoke-filled rooms decades ago resurfaced, connected by the very patterns Margaret had observed and recorded throughout her career. Her methodical approach to journalism, once dismissed as outdated, proved uniquely suited to uncovering long-term systemic issues that required patience and perspective to understand fully. Perhaps most satisfying was the realization that her operation had created something far more valuable than personal vindication. Young reporters who had initially joined her cause out of curiosity now spoke of rediscovering the core values of journalism. Veterans who had grown cynical about the industry's direction found renewed purpose in collaborating with the next generation. The arbitrary divisions between old-school and new-school journalism dissolved in the face of a shared commitment to truth-telling and public service. Margaret's former boss's attempts to mitigate the crisis grew increasingly transparent. Press releases acknowledging areas for improvement, gave way to desperate attempts to distance himself from the disclosed corruption. Yet each statement only highlighted the disconnect between his vision of modern journalism and the reality unfolding before the public's eyes. The very qualities he had dismissed, institutional memory, cultivated sources, and patient investigation, had proven essential to exposing the truth he had helped conceal. Through it all, Margaret remained focused on the bigger picture. This wasn't just about proving a point or settling scores. It was about demonstrating that journalism's true value lay in its ability to adapt without abandoning its core principles. The fusion of experience and innovation had created something powerful, a model for how the industry could evolve without sacrificing its integrity. As she watched the story continue to unfold across multiple platforms, reaching audiences she had never dreamed of impacting during her traditional career, Margaret understood that this moment represented more than personal triumph. It marked a turning point in how society valued experience and expertise in an age obsessed with novelty and speed. The investigation's success triggered a wave of reflection across the journalism community. Industry conferences hastily added panels discussing the intersection of traditional reporting methods and modern technology, with Margaret's operation serving as the primary case study. Young journalists who had once viewed older practitioners as obstacles to progress now sought their guidance, recognizing the unique insights that came from decades of observation and documentation. Seasoned reporters, inspired by Margaret's example, began mentoring programs that paired experience with innovation, creating hybrid approaches to investigative work. Traditional media organizations found themselves forced to reconsider their strategies. The rapid-fire content production model that had dominated the industry faced scrutiny as Margaret's methodical approach proved more effective at uncovering and communicating complex truths. Newsrooms began restructuring, creating space for both rapid response teams and long-term investigative units. Some publications established institutional memory departments, dedicated to preserving and analyzing historical context alongside current events. The business community reacted with equal parts apprehension and admiration. Corporate leaders who had previously dismissed experienced voices now recognized the value of institutional knowledge in navigating complex challenges. Human resource departments revised their policies, implementing programs that leveraged senior employees' expertise rather than viewing them as liabilities. The concept of reverse mentoring gained traction, with younger employees teaching technological skills while learning strategic thinking from their more experienced colleagues. Academic institutions responded by updating their journalism curricula. Courses now emphasize the importance of maintaining detailed records and cultivating long-term sources alongside data analysis and multimedia production techniques. Research projects examining the role of institutional memory in investigative journalism received unprecedented funding, with Margaret's operation serving as the foundation for numerous studies. Journalism schools began offering specialized tracks combining traditional reporting methods with modern analytical tools. Public discourse shifted dramatically as well. Citizens who had grown cynical about media coverage found renewed faith in journalism's ability to hold power accountable. The investigation demonstrated that meaningful change required both immediate action and sustained effort, validating approaches that combined technological sophistication with patient observation. Community organizations began forming partnerships with journalists, recognizing the value of institutional knowledge in addressing systemic issues. Government agencies and regulatory bodies took notice, implementing reforms to protect experienced workers from arbitrary dismissals based on age or perceived obsolescence. Legislation protecting institutional memory within organizations gained support, with policymakers citing Margaret's investigation as evidence of its critical importance. Professional associations established new standards for documenting and preserving organizational knowledge, ensuring that valuable insights wouldn't be lost during periods of transition. The ripple effects extended beyond journalism and into other fields facing similar challenges of balancing experience with innovation. Medical institutions, legal organizations, and educational systems examined their own practices regarding senior professionals. The concept of knowledge capital gained prominence, with organizations developing systematic approaches to capturing and utilizing the wisdom accumulated through years of practice. Margaret's success story became a catalyst for broader societal changes, challenging assumptions about the relationship between age, relevance, and effectiveness in an increasingly fast-paced world. As weeks turned into months, Margaret's apartment transformed from a temporary command center into a permanent hub for collaborative journalism. The walls once adorned with her personal achievements now displayed a dynamic timeline of ongoing investigations, each thread representing a new exploration into the city's complex power structures. Young reporters continued to arrive daily, seeking guidance not just in investigative techniques but in maintaining ethical standards amid increasing pressure for clicks and shares. The very space that had witnessed her dismissal's aftermath had become a sanctuary for quality journalism. Her former employer's attempts at reform proved largely cosmetic, as deeper issues within their organizational culture resisted meaningful change. Despite public commitments to diversity and experience, their focus remained fixed on short-term metrics and viral content. Meanwhile, Margaret's network flourished, attracting talent disillusioned by corporate media's limitations. Independent journalists found in her operation a model for sustainable, impactful reporting that valued substance over sensationalism and patience over immediacy. The investigation's success spawned numerous spin-off projects, each tackling different aspects of systemic issues while maintaining the core principles that had made the original operation successful. Teams formed organically, combining experienced reporters with tech-savvy analysts and community activists. They developed innovative methods for crowdsourcing information while preserving rigorous verification standards, creating a hybrid approach that respected both traditional journalistic ethics and modern engagement strategies. Margaret watched with satisfaction as her former protégés took leading roles in these initiatives, their growth reflecting the power of mentorship and institutional memory. The cycle of knowledge transfer that had sustained her throughout her career now operated on a larger scale, with multiple generations contributing their strengths to create something greater than any individual could achieve alone. Her living room meetings, once covert strategy sessions, evolved into formal workshops where experience and innovation merged to tackle increasingly complex challenges. The city itself responded to this new form of journalism with unexpected enthusiasm. Citizens who had grown apathetic about traditional media found themselves engaged by reporting that combined depth with accessibility, history with immediacy. Community groups formed partnerships with Margaret's network, providing ground-level insights that enriched investigations while benefiting from the exposure and credibility they brought. The barriers between professional journalists and citizen contributors dissolved, creating a collaborative ecosystem that valued all forms of expertise. Yet beneath the surface of this apparent success lay lingering tensions. While Margaret's operation had proven the value of experience, it also highlighted the challenges of sustaining such efforts in an industry driven by profit margins and audience metrics. The delicate balance between maintaining independence and securing funding became an ongoing concern, with potential supporters often misunderstanding the nature of true investigative work. The very success that had validated her approach created expectations that sometimes conflicted with the methodical pace required for thorough investigation. Despite these challenges, Margaret's influence continued to grow. Her apartment became a testing ground for new models of journalism funding and distribution, experimenting with subscription-based support, community sponsorship, and innovative partnerships. The traditional boundaries between reporter and subject, investigator and advocate, began to blur in productive ways, creating opportunities for more nuanced storytelling while raising questions about objectivity and advocacy. As she stood at her window watching another team of young reporters arrive for their shift, Margaret recognized that her journey had created something far more significant than personal vindication or even institutional reform. It had demonstrated that true progress in journalism, indeed in any field, required embracing paradox, honoring tradition while embracing innovation, valuing experience while welcoming fresh perspectives, and maintaining patience while responding to urgency. The very qualities her former employer had dismissed as obsolete had become the foundation for a new paradigm in truth-seeking and public service. Beyond the immediate impact of her investigation, Margaret's operation catalyzed a broader cultural shift in how society valued experience and institutional memory. Corporations began establishing wisdom councils, comprising senior professionals to advise on strategic decisions, recognizing that historical context often provided crucial insights for navigating contemporary challenges. Educational institutions developed programs specifically designed to capture and preserve expert knowledge, while technology companies created platforms to facilitate knowledge transfer between generations. The rigid dichotomy between traditional and modern approaches dissolved, replaced by hybrid models that acknowledged the complementary nature of different types of expertise. The journalism community witnessed perhaps the most profound transformation. Legacy media organizations, once resistant to change, began integrating long-term investigative units alongside their rapid response teams. These units operated with autonomy, freed from the constraints of daily deadlines to pursue stories requiring patient development and careful documentation. Funding models evolved to support this dual approach, with readers increasingly willing to support in-depth reporting that delivered meaningful impact rather than transient attention. The success of Margaret's operation demonstrated that audiences valued substance over sensationalism when given the choice, leading to a gradual realignment of journalistic priorities. Professional associations across various fields established new standards for documenting and preserving institutional knowledge. Healthcare systems implemented comprehensive programs to capture clinical insights from retiring practitioners, while legal organizations created repositories of case histories and strategic lessons. The concept of experience capital gained prominence, with organizations recognizing that dismissing senior professionals meant losing irreplaceable assets. Workplace cultures shifted to value accumulated wisdom alongside innovative thinking, creating environments where multiple generations could contribute meaningfully to shared goals. Technological advancements began supporting rather than replacing human expertise. Artificial intelligence systems learned to incorporate historical context into their analyses, while data visualization tools evolved to present complex patterns in accessible ways. The fusion of human insight with technological capability produced new methodologies for understanding and addressing systemic issues. Young professionals, inspired by Margaret's example, sought to develop tools that enhanced rather than diminished the value of institutional memory, creating a virtuous cycle of innovation and preservation. Public discourse reflected these changes, with citizens increasingly demanding depth and context in their information sources. The success of Margaret's investigation had demonstrated that meaningful solutions required understanding root causes rather than merely addressing symptoms. Community organizations, emboldened by the effectiveness of collaborative journalism, began applying similar principles to social challenges, combining historical awareness with contemporary action. The arbitrary divisions between generations, disciplines, and approaches gave way to recognition of their interconnected value in creating lasting change. As these transformations unfolded, Margaret watched with quiet satisfaction. Her personal victory had become a catalyst for systemic evolution, proving that true progress required embracing rather than rejecting the past. The qualities once dismissed as outdated had revealed themselves as essential components of effective action in an increasingly complex world. Through her unwavering commitment to principle and her willingness to adapt without compromising her values, she had shown that experience wasn't a liability to be managed but a resource to be cultivated, and that sometimes, the most revolutionary act was simply refusing to accept arbitrary limitations on what constitutes relevance or value.